Morocco and Israel have reached a U.S. brokered agreement on normalizing relations. Under the deal, Rabat will establish full diplomatic relations and resume official contacts with Tel Aviv. As part of the agreement, Donald Trump, who is due to leave office on January the 20th, agreed to recognize Morocco's sovereignty over the contested Western Sahara region. Reacting to the new development, Palestinian resistance movement Hamas issued a statement strongly condemning the Tel Aviv-Rabat agreement as a political sin. Also, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad movement condemned normalization deal, describing it as a betrayal of Jerusalem al-Quds. Morocco is now the fourth Arab country after the UAE, Bahrain, and Sudan to agree to a normalization deal with the Israelis since August. To help us better understand how Palestinians feel about this deal, we're now joined by our correspondent, Ashraf Shannon, who's with us from Gaza. Ashraf?
Yes, but Palestinians are outraged by this new normalization agreement between the Israeli regime and Morocco. This follows normalization of ties between the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Sudan, and the Israeli regime. Hamas movement said the this normalization agreement is basically a political sin and only encourages the Israeli regime to violate the rights of Palestinians. Islamic Jihad movement described this agreement as treason and betrayal to Jerusalem, al-Quds, and the Palestinian cause, while Mujahideen movement said that such agreement will never give the Israeli regime legitimacy or security. And also on Friday night, the Palestinian resistance factions in Gaza said that the normalization of ties between Morocco and the Israeli regime is a backstab and will never hide the, quote, the ugly face of the Israeli regime. Palestinians feel betrayed by the normalization of ties between Arab countries, especially in the Persian Gulf region, and the Israeli regime. And now you have United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Sudan, and Morocco, and already Egypt and Jordan have had so-called peace deals with the Israeli regime before.
All right, thanks a lot, Ashraf. That was our correspondent, Ashraf Shannon, joining us from Gaza. Also with us on tonight's debate, we have journalist and political analyst, Mr. Elijah Magnier, joining us from Caracas. Also, we have CEO of the Ramadhan Foundation, Mr. Mohammed Shafiq, who's joining us from Manchester. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. Let's start off with Mr. Magnier in Caracas. Sir, how do you view this deal, taking into account the timing of it, as Donald Trump is on his way out?
I think Donald Trump is trying not to leave to Joe Biden the possibility to collect the work of normalization between Israel and other Muslim countries. And it makes no sense, it is not in the interest of the US to see normalization between Morocco and Israel in particular, because the Moroccan population are really not in favor of the Israelis. I've been to Morocco several times and I see how people behave with the Israeli, what they think, and what is their real feeling toward the Palestinian cause. This is one of the rare times the King of Morocco accepts to make a step that is completely against the will of the population, and this is why it is indeed a political normalization. Israel is going to gain a few flights between Morocco and Israel, and the publicity for Netanyahu, who is really in need to boost his image because he's in deep trouble domestically by facing a new elections. He has the manifestation daily under his house. He's struggling because Israel is facing the biggest economic crisis ever. And also it is the normalization with these countries who never pose a threat to Israel is also commented by the Israeli media itself, saying it doesn't make a lot of sense really because these were not the enemy of Israel. So it's a kind of a show. However, this is different from the Emirati normalization because the Emirati population find themselves quickly integrated with the Israelis. This is not going to happen with Morocco.
Mohammed Shafiq, I'd like to get your thoughts on the agreement as well. As part of it, Donald Trump, who's due to leave office, as we mentioned earlier, on January the 20th, agreed to recognize Morocco's sovereignty over the contested Western Sahara region. How will this deal affect Western Sahara? We also know it's not legal nor internationally binding for the U.S. to make this kind of deal concerning an area that's halfway across the world.
Yeah, I think it's a really sad moment that you've got Arab countries that have made relationships with Israel even before a Palestinian state has been recognized and enshrined under international law. And for that to happen, there's got to be an end to the occupation by the Israelis of West Bank, of Gaza, of the Golan Heights, and illegal settlements that have been built successively over decades, increasing the presence of Israeli citizens in Palestinian territories. And I think it's a really sad moment that the Arab world, instead of continuing to stand in unity with the Palestinian people and their struggle for freedom, is letting their relationship with a right-wing xenophobe in the White House, in this term, Donald Trump, on his way out after a humiliating defeat in the presidential election, and trying to restore relationships between the Israelis and Arab countries. And I think what we have to now do is that civic society, as my colleague from Caracas has said, is that civic society, the ordinary man and woman on the streets in Arab countries and around the world, are standing with Palestine in solidarity against the occupation, against the daily bombardment we see from the Israelis in the West Bank and in Gaza, where I've been 3 times and seen for myself the carnage that people live under. So, we may be downbeaten, we may be concerned, and we may be, disillusioned. But I think it requires us to refocus our energy and commitment to the Palestinian cause, because it's a cause worthwhile supporting. And the world, as Nelson Mandela said, the world is not truly free until the Palestinians are free.
Elijah Magnier, Palestine's Islamic Jihad movement, has condemned the agreement, describing it as a betrayal of Jerusalem, Al-Quds. In the past, the Islamic Jihad movement warned that recognizing the Israeli regime is a great threat for the region. Do you see it in that light as well?
I think Israel is a threat to the region. Like the Russian ambassador said yesterday, one of the Russian ambassadors, Israel is carrying out unlawful assassination, is aggressive towards its neighbors, has carried out hundreds of attacks against Syria, is preventing the right of return of the owner of the land in Palestine, is attacking Lebanon, has attacked Iraq, is attacking even in Yemen. So Israel is taking the initiative on what is called a prevention attack under this false and unlawful title, attacking other neighbor countries because of domestic issues or because of its own policy. And also it is showing that it is not worth of making peace with any country around the Middle East. And what we see, unfortunately, is the Arab states have given up on the Palestinian cause, at the exception of Iran, that is still holding it and holding tight to it. Of course, there is Kuwait that has not normalized yet, but it doesn't have a power to stand against the Americans and the Israelis, while Iran has. So the Palestinian cause, at the end of the day, it's a universal cause of the right of the people to survive and to have their independence and have back their land, regardless the sectarian, regardless the religion, regardless the geography. And this is unfortunately not happening because there is no more international law. That's finished. We see when the Americans are imposing sanctions to starve population, it is a clear violation of the international law, and they don't care about it. So at the United Nations, there is a saying law for all equal. Well, they should change that and saying no law for everybody. There's no more law. That's why the normalization with the Israelis on behalf of the Palestinian cause and the Palestinian will, who refuse such a normalization, until they get back their territory is a crime not only against the Palestinians, because it is not right to say the Palestinian cause belongs to the Palestinians, but because to the free world, it belongs to the free world. And that is a crime against the free world.
Mohammed Shafiq, 4 Arab governments have now established ties with the Israelis. In your opinion, does this put the security of the region at risk?
Yeah, I think it does, to the extent that, as you see, the biggest obstacle to peace in the Middle East is resolving the conflict of Palestine. And I think that if that can be resolved, if Israel can stop its illegal settlements, stop its daily oppression of the Palestinian people, stop the siege in Gaza, as we've seen for so many years, then there is a chance for peace and there's a chance for normalization. But what you cannot do is start the process of normalization and claim that you then still support a two-state solution, as some of these Arab countries do. They're entitled to their own foreign policies. They're entitled to have their own relationships. But what they're not entitled to is trying to, show the world that somehow they're supporters of Palestine, and at this step, establishing relationships with the Israeli authorities is somehow supported by the masses of the people. It's not. And I think it's really imperative that we all raise our voices in solidarity with the Palestinian people and be very clear about that. You talked about, my colleague in Caracas talked about just Iran, being the obstacle to Israel and its wider agenda. Actually, I'll add a few countries to that. You look at Malaysia, you look at Pakistan. The Prime Minister Imran Khan has been very clear that he would never recognize Israel until there was a Palestinian state. So there are many players, including the Turks, who have been very forthright. Whilst they have diplomatic relations with the Israeli country, but they have a love-hate relationship, if you like. And President Erdogan is quite outspoken on those issues. But I think you're seeing that leadership now from beyond the Arab states, because Palestine is not dependent on the Arab states. Palestine is dependent on the voice across the world. And that's been articulated by Prime Minister of Pakistan so eloquently in the last few weeks in his comments on never recognizing Israel until there is a free Palestinian state.
Mr. Magnier, the resistance movement Hamas has said that the deal will increase Israel's belligerence and its denial of the rights of the Palestinian people. Are these normalization deals, in a way, giving a green light for the Israelis to continue their brutal day-to-day violation of the rights of the Palestinians?
With or without normalization, the Israelis continue their aggressive behavior toward their neighbors and other Middle Eastern states. They consider they pose a danger to Israel expansion and plans. Just let me add something here, that no US president ever managed to stop the Israeli settlements. Only Iran is supporting the Palestinian cause by financial means, media, and transfer of experience. The other state my colleague has mentioned, which I really appreciate, they vocally support Palestinians, but the Palestinians, although the vocal support is very appreciated, but the Palestinians need more than that. They are starving, they are surrounded, and Qatar from time to time give them money only for them not to rebel against the Israelis. So yes, Israel will continue its aggression. Israel, only by a policy of deterrence like Hezbollah has imposed on Lebanon, that Israel will stop being aggressive against countries who rejected the US hegemony and the Israeli ipso facto in the region. And that is Syria, Iraq, and Lebanon, and Iran. And these are the countries on the front line against Israel expansion and to stop its belligerent act in the Middle East.
Sure. Mohammed Shafiq, in the wake of these normalization deals, all Palestinian factions have been adamant that they will continue on with their resistance. How do you see the aftermath of this deal? Will we see a more united Palestinian front in the face of these measures?
I think one of the consequences of why this is happening is because of that broken disunity under Mahmoud Abbas and the PLO, who've continued to negotiate and work with the Israeli government whilst not receiving anything in return. So we see a massive increase in the number of illegal settlements in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. We see the continued oppression of the Palestinian people. We see what, the situation in Gaza and how important it is, as I said, raising one's voice, contributing to helping the humanitarian care issues, but also being very clear that our support is dependent on the Palestinians unifying. And I think if there's anything coming out of this, I think it shows the Palestinian leadership from Fatah, from Islamic Jihad, from all the various political organizations that they have to unite under the umbrella of the Palestinian struggle to make sure that there is freedom for the Palestinian people. And because this is a just cause that requires leadership and support from around the world. And that's what people like myself, I'm a British Pakistani Muslim, very proud of my heritage, very proud that my Prime Minister of Pakistan, Imran Khan, has taken such a vocal step in speaking up in favor of the Palestinians and never recognizing Israel until the Palestinians have a state. But I'm also equally proud of the fact that I've been somebody who's been to Gaza in the last, I went in 2013-14, I went 3 times. So I've seen what life is like for the Palestinians, and their struggle is my struggle, and I'll continue to raise my voice wherever I can on any platform to support the struggle for the Palestinian cause.
Elijah Magnier, what about the insufficient international response, like the OIC, like the Arab League? The Arab League, as we know, failed to condemn the recent normalization deals. Do you think Arab governments are now turning a blind eye to the suffering of their Palestinian brethren?
No, I don't think so. I don't think the Arabs are turning a blind eye on the suffering of the Palestinians. I think the Arabs are partners of the suffering of the Palestinians. By accepting to normalize with Israel, there is no more Arab League. There is no more any unification among Arab countries for one cause, the essential cause of Palestine. We saw how the Saudis and the Qatari relationship went to the floor. We saw how the Saudis behave with other countries in the Middle East. And we saw the aggressive from Saudi Arabia to Lebanon and Syria for 9 years of war. Qatar also participated in that. These are members of the Arab League. Yes, what my colleague said, I fully agree with. The disunity among the Palestinians is the problem. By a unified front among the Palestinians, then the Arabs will have to move, but they not, because Mahmoud Abbas is always on the camp of the Americans. And recently, in last couple of weeks, he changed his mind without even informing the Palestinians that he is going back to his old relationship and coordination on the security and all other levels with the Israelis and the Americans. The Arab League doesn't exist anymore. There is no more Arab League since the war in Iraq, since the war in Syria, since the violation of the territory of the Palestinian and the normalization of all the country encouraged by Saudi Arabia. Morocco would never have gone to normalize with the Israelis without the pressure of Mohammed bin Salman. So the Emirati is the same, the Bahraini is the same, the Omani is the same. They all followed. Sudan is exactly the same. So no, there's no more Arab League, and there is no more Palestinian cause for this bunch of countries.
Mohammed Shafiq, do you agree with our other guest? He says that Arab governments are not only complacent now, but are complicit in the suffering of the Palestinians.
Yeah, I mean, you can take Egypt, for example, that has the Rafah crossing. It's continued to close the crossing. Very little humanitarian aid is being let through those crossings. And so it's a contributing factor into the ongoing struggle for a Palestinian freedom. And I think my colleague is absolutely right that the Arab League and the Organization of Islamic Conference have become toothless. We have a maniac in the White House in his final few days trying to force, nudge, threaten other countries to recognize Israel. And America, having so-called independent foreign policy, is now in a position where it's doing the bidding for its ally Israel in the region. And that's a real concern, that if you continue to, as I said, occupy Palestinian lands, you have illegal settlements, you have Gaza under an open-air prison, and the world recognizes the injustice, but the people with the power to change it are refusing to do that. And so I think, yeah, it's absolutely right that you look at the Kashmiri cause from my neck of the woods in Pakistan, and Kashmiri, a struggle very much similar to what is happening to the Palestinians. Very much similar. The OIC refused to acknowledge it. The OIC refused to discuss it. And I think this is the moment for the masses around the world that believe in individual freedom,
Sure.
and from our Islamic faith, to stand up against injustice anywhere in the world. And that should be our mission. And that's why we should support the cause of Palestine.
Okay, Elijah Magnier, one last question for you, very briefly, if you may, about these normalization deals. Donald Trump said more countries will be joining in. He mentioned, quote unquote, some of the big ones. Who are you expecting to see now before Trump leaves office?
I think he probably is thinking about Indonesia. He's probably thinking about Saudi Arabia, that is waiting for more countries to join in. And he would very much like to impose on Saudi Arabia, because he has a very strong card to wave in front of Mohammed bin Salman, that is the assassination of Khashoggi. And this is why he's holding him by the neck,
Right.
and will force the Saudi recognition of Israel before the end of his term in office in January 2021.
All right, thanks to my guest, journalist and political analyst Elijah Magnier, joining us from Caracas. Also thanks to CEO of the Ramadhan Foundation, Mohammed Shafiq, joining us from the British capital, London. And also special thanks to you, our viewers, for staying with us on tonight's debate. Goodbye until next time.